Good morning, Olive Branch Church family. It is great to be with you on this Sunday. Happy Canada Day. Hope you guys got a chance to enjoy the hot weather and just to connect with us here. If you are new, we'd love for you to check out our website, our Instagram, and our Facebook, and we would love to connect you to the right people. Just want to read out of Ephesians 1 here. This is what Paul says, even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him. Before the foundation of the world, God was looking, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, they're all looking at us saying, I'm going to love you. I'm going to call you and love you. And that is a fantastic thing. And so that's something for us to remember to say, God is in control. He's very powerful. He's very strong. And when we read that verse, at least when I read it, I go, whoa, I'm dealing with a really powerful and fantastic God. We pray that this worship set and the sermon from Kent would be fruitful for you guys. See you next Sunday.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves a 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't
Thanks for the worship, Dan and team. We've been in this series basically on the Sermon on the Mount, this last part of it called the Signmaker, and it involves the last chapter of Jesus' message found in Matthew chapter 7. And Jesus has basically talked about lots of different things through this whole message. It's an astounding message. And then he closes this whole entire message, this whole section, talking about two things that most of us are familiar with. One of them would be regret. In other words, man, I wish I had. And then relief. I'm glad I did. That's how he ends this message. Now, I don't know if you have any regrets. I'm sure you do. I have regrets. I bought a van at night. That was not a good idea. Kind of dumb. I bought a boat engine on Kijiji. That was also kind of dumb. So I've done some dumb things. But I've also had some relief moments, too, where I said, glad I did. You know, for example, when Lori and I decided we weren't going to use credit cards at the beginning of our marriage and not use them until we could pay them off, I'm glad I did. When I started running 20-some years ago, I'm glad I did. I'm glad I married Lori. I'm glad for lots of things, relief. Lots of things in my life that I can say I'm glad I did, but also have the regrets. The end of his entire message, the most brilliant message ever given, Jesus basically says, if you build my teaching into your life, you'll be glad you did. If you don't, you'll wish you had. Now, most of us heard the story that Jesus used that day. You know, we probably sang it in Sunday school. You know, the wise man built his house upon the rock. You know, we've all probably heard that. Now, here's the tragedy for I think our world. Jesus' message, Jesus' kind of final story of what he has to say about this, it kind of has been included, you know, along the same lines as Grimm's fairy tales and Aesop's fables, you know, and they live happily ever after, or they didn't live happily ever after. And all you have to do is look at the unnecessary heartbreaks and tragedies in our world to understand, you know, maybe Jesus was right, you know, that love would be the way to go, that retaliation is not a good way to do it. And whether or not people would actually say it out loud, most people would say, I'm glad I did, or I wish I had. Now, when people who were standing out in front of Jesus that day in his audience, when they heard him begin to talk about, you know, carpenters building houses, well, that would have clicked in for them, because Jesus was just like fresh out of the homemaking business as a carpenter and so on. It's possible that he had even built some homes for the people in the audience. And all architects and contractors and construction workers know something. When you're building something, whether it's a home or a car or an aircraft carrier, you have to consider what it's going to be used for. You have to consider what kind of pressures it will have to endure. You have to, you know, think about the consequences if it fails. And then, of course, you also have to think about, can I afford it? Most of you have at least heard of the Challenger disaster from 1986. Some of you were babies then. Some of you weren't even a twinkle in anybody's eye. But if you've seen the footage, there's this breathtaking launch, and they're headed up into this dark blue sky. And as you're watching, all of a sudden, there's this plume of smoke, and you see the pieces go in all kinds of directions. And all of a sudden, this $4 billion aircraft is blown to smithereens along with the 7 people who are on board. Krista McCullough, school teacher, was one of the first civilians that had ever taken a flight, and of course this happened. Now here's the problem, okay? You know what it was? It was a rubber O-ring, like a big rubber band that was connecting, you know, the two of the sections of the rocket, and it couldn't withstand the freezing temperatures that were on, you know, that were part of it the night before. And the tragedy is that NASA knew about it. They knew that there could be a potential failure. They'd been warned. And you can just imagine, you know, the people who were in charge of making that decision probably said, wow, wish we would have listened. We all have said that one way or another. Jesus said that the ultimate regret in anybody's life is having everything that they've built collapse. It's when your house goes down and it didn't have to. Now, he started this talk by basically saying, you know, you want to live a blessed life, if you want to be happy in life, it's not what you think. It's not about success or money or popularity. It's about character like humility and mercy and moral purity and a longing to do what's right and a willingness to, you know, withstand difficulty for doing what's right. He said that if you want to avoid ruining your life, you have to respect what God has said about how to live it. It's just, part of it. He said that anger and lust can lead you into a hell of a life and make you regret the day you were born. He said that loving other people, even your enemies, is the best choice you'll ever make. And summarizing it all, Jesus says this: if you remember to honor God and if you remember to treat others as you would like to be treated, you'll live God's way. But you have to understand, I am the gate to this way, and it's not an easy way. It's going to be unpopular at times. And then Jesus closes with this challenge. Let me read it for you. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise. It's like a person who builds a house on solid rock. And though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it's built on rock. Jesus had probably done this as a house builder, as a construction worker. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish. Like a person who builds a house on sand. And when the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Now, a lot of people in the world have heard of Jesus' sayings. Probably, I'm guessing the word Good Samaritan has made it into, some of the languages, most of the languages of the world. I'm sure that, when people talk about prodigal son, most people know, what they mean. One of the favorite phrases of Jesus is, don't judge. Everybody loves that one. But listening to Jesus' words and following them is a very different thing. To listen and not do is like the NASA engineers getting warned about this O-ring and then just blowing it off and thinking everything will probably be fine. So let's talk about what most people do with Jesus' teachings, okay? People like, in our world, people like and collect little succinct sayings and ideas that they think are cool, and they kind of piece them together, and think, they get something from Instagram, they get something from Facebook, something from Mark Twain, Madonna, Tesla, John Lennon. It doesn't really matter. And they also collect little spiritual things, little pieces from Hinduism, like karma, and then, collect some stuff from Buddhism, like serenity, and, vegetarianism from Shirley MacLaine. So they collect these things, and then they kind of tend to use them as the foundation for their lives. And so, people tend to think, well, Jesus, has some really cool sayings. I like some of what he has to say. And what happens is that Jesus kind of gets, included in the list of all these other people and what they've said and so on. And let me explain the particle board thing. Back years ago, wood manufacturers were looking for a use for all the sawdust and chips that were left over from the real wood that they made furniture with. And so what they did was they had this technique of mixing it with glue and then pressing it together, and voila, get something like this. Now this is laminated with plastic, which makes it stronger, and you can wipe it off and stuff like this. But it's particle board. And if you look real closely at this stuff, you'll see all these little particles that have all been, put together. It smells like wood, it looks like wood, it feels like wood, and it's flat and solid, but it breaks. You just like that. It's, and that's the problem. People, if you want to build a life, you don't want to build it on particle board because it won't bear the weight of your life. And a lot of people, they just do this. They just pick up ideas along the way, collect them on Google and stuff like this. Ooh, that's a cool saying. And they paste it on their walls in their rooms, and they send them out on Instagram and all these different things. But when you're building something, this is the core truth. You have to consider what it's going to be used for, the kind of pressures it's going to have to endure, the consequences if it fails, and finally, can you afford it? And when it comes to what you're going to build your life on, the foundation you're going to build your life on, the question you have to ask is, can you not afford it? Because this stuff, I don't know if you've ever seen particle board when it hits water, what it's like. It'll swell up and it becomes soft and mushy. You don't want that when the floods come in life, and they will come. Now, here's the truth about you and me. We're all building something with our lives. We all are, okay? And Jesus uses the illustration of the most personal of all the buildings. It's a home. It's a house. A home is the most expensive thing that most of us will ever own or build. A home is pretty much, everything in life that matters. It includes our family. It includes our friends when we invite them over. It has, collect our memories there. The most intimate moments that we share with our children and with our wives and spouses are there. That's where the tears are shed. That's where we hold our celebrations. That's where we celebrate our victors, and that's where we mourn the disasters of our lives. Jesus, a construction worker, knows that houses are important, that houses are expensive, and what you build your house with and what you build it on is a huge deal. And the truth is that right this moment, right this very moment, you're building a house. I'm building a house. We're building something with our lives. And the deal is, you see, you've got one life, you've got one chance, you've got one set of talents and opportunities, one group of people to travel with, and we have to build this once-in-a-lifetime home called a life. And the question that sometimes comes up when Jesus makes a statement like this, that people need to build their lives and on what he says, is, well, what makes Jesus different? What makes him more special than all the other spiritual people who lived and taught? And this gets right into the identity of Jesus. And that's a fair question, right? He claimed to be God. That's what he said, okay? He claimed, the record of his life tells us that, he saw the mess and that he stepped out of heaven and he became one of us and he gave his life so that we could have life for all of eternity. That's what he says about himself. That's what those who knew him best say about him. Jesus taught that truth is not a means of self-improvement. Truth is foundational to our lives. The author of the message, Eugene Peterson, the paraphrase, says this. He says, "These words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you're like a smart carpenter who built his house on solid rock. Rain poured down, river flooded, a tornado hit, but nothing moved that house. It was fixed to the rock. But if you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you're like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. And when the storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards." See, Jesus knew that a lot of people would take this foundational, teaching that he's given in the Sermon on the Mount, and it would be like they would be using it like in, like teaching series, like 12 steps to happiness, and how to have the life you've always wanted, and so on. And Jesus, it's just kind of another lay of sawdust for the particle board. And that's not what it is. And that's the question I want to ask you as we close. Like, what do you actually believe about Jesus? What do you believe about him? Do you believe that he told the truth about himself? That he's the judge of all the earth? Do you believe the truth about him when he said, "I am the I am who spoke to Moses. I lived before Moses. I've been around, for all of eternity." That he's the Savior of everything. That he is the one that we will all give account to at the end of our lives. Do you believe that? Because that's what he said, and if it's not true, then he's a liar. And we basically need to throw him out along with everything else. See, I believe that Jesus, as God, has the right to be the sign maker, because he created life. And he has the right to label the foundations that we have as either being sand or bedrock. And there's a lot of people, who want to help you with other things in your life. That's not a bad thing. You look on, on TV and on the internet, and there's people there who want you to have a healthy gut. Wouldn't you like to have a healthy gut? Well, there are people who can help you to do that. There's some great advice, on having, less joint pain. We have Dr. Ho right down the street down here, and he can help you with that. There are thousands of products, maybe tens of thousands of products that can make you more beautiful if you need to be more beautiful, and make your hair more luxurious, which wouldn't help me much. Give you, smoother skin and whiter teeth, and slimmer thighs, and a hard stomach and all this stuff. There are many ways that you can improve your car. There's many people out there that would like to help your pet behave better. Give up on cats because they don't give a rip what you think, but dogs actually do want to work for you. And they can make your relational world a little bit stronger. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about just some helpful hints to help you have a better life. He's saying what I'm teaching you is foundation. Now, it's possible to just mentally agree with what he said. Yeah, whatever, tells us about life and never actually do it. We do that all the time, right? Most of us know that doctors, physicians, experts would tell us, that we need to eat more healthy food, and we also need to eat actually probably less healthy food, more healthy food, and then we also need to get exercise. Everybody knows that. And most people believe that would help them to have a better life. Do people do it? Well, Not actually. See, there are actually two kinds of people, according to Jesus here. One group hears his words and says, yeah, boy, that's true. That is so cool. That is so good. But they never do it. And then there's another group who hears his words and puts them into practice. And it's when you put his words into practice that you are able to say, I'm glad I did. The first common truth about every person is that we're building something important with our lives. We're building something. We're building a house. We're building a home. A home is where we keep everything that's important to us. You know, to lose a car, that's tough. To lose a home, devastating. Okay? Home is a big deal. And what Jesus is talking about here is even more important than your home. We mentioned it. It's your life. It's what you build. It's your one and only life. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, like, what am I going to do with the dash between the dates? Like, there's the date when I was born, there's the date that I'm going to die. Like, what about the dash? What am I going to accomplish with that? What do I want to have accomplished? How do you define success? Let me just take a shot at this. I'm guessing that most of you will want to know happiness. Happiness is not the giddy feeling that you have when you make money. Happiness has to do with being at peace with God, at peace with others, and at peace with yourselves. Most of us want that. I'm guessing that most of you want to leave behind you a relational world that's intact. People who are glad that you were part of their lives. People that are glad that you came their way. Most of us will want to have successfully accomplished something that's good, like done something with your life that uses the gifts that God gave you to make the world a better place. You've invested well. And you want to have somebody whose life has been changed for the better because you gave, because you helped, because you loved them, because you encouraged them, because you listened to them, because you came their way. And I'm guessing that most of us will not want a trail of blood behind us. I'll tell you what, I don't want people in the corners, I'm lying in some casket saying, man, I'm glad he was gone. He was a selfish, proud, narcissistic person who used everybody who came his way. Jesus wants you to live well too. That's why he came. That's why he taught us. So the truth is, everybody builds a house. Everybody builds a house. Everybody has some access to truth. Everybody has to decide what they're going to do with the truth. And then Jesus clearly lays out two possible scenarios. He says, if you build your life, your home, your relational world, your work, your mission, all your hopes and dreams for yourself and for those you know and love on the truth that I teach, your building will withstand the worst that life can throw at you. And it looks a little bit like this when you kind of graph it out. It's not just the truth that undergirds our life. It's the truth that's around us. It's the truth that's over us. You want truth as a part of your life. Now, in the world system that we live in, people are okay, hey, I'm just going to go for the cosmetic thing. I'm going to, get the outer skin of it right, the outer quarter of an inch. In Jesus' world, they didn't have photographs. They didn't have Instagram. They didn't have, in the internet. They didn't have, anything, designer clothing, designer shoes and stuff like this. It's a lot easier to jazz things up in our culture and make yourself look really good. Put your picture on Instagram and have everybody go, wow, you look great, and so on. Sometimes we say things or imply things or buy things to try and impress other people, into thinking that what we're building is world class when it actually, under the surface, is a lot less impressive. And just so we're clear, let's kind of do an overview on what Jesus is talking about, what he's dealing with here. This is not exterior stuff. This is about the interior of our lives. It's about humility. It's about peacemaking. It's about, the passion that we have to do the right thing. It's the passion we have to do what's right even when it costs us. He's talking about, having a lifetime of lasting impact on other people, influencing people, making a difference. He's talking about treating other people in ways that leave them whole, that respects who they are, their personalities, their souls, and their future. He talks about being spiritually authentic and real. He's talking about keeping money in its place, not letting it become a god and run our lives. He's talking about, making what God is building on this planet, what God is up to change all of the world and in people's lives, the focus of your attention, and not just what you're building, not just what you want to do. And he's talking about taking the right paths as opposed to the easy path. He's talking about a willingness to take the time and do the work so that when it's time to say yes, you can say yes, and when it's time to say no, that you can say no. And that life that Jesus talks about is bedrock. It's bedrock. It's what you will wish that you had built your life on at the end of time. Now, here's the deal. This sometimes is very difficult and time-consuming and discouraging, And sometimes, you're in the middle of building a foundation and stuff and trying to work with truth in this way, and you look at somebody and you're thinking, wow, building a home on the beach is a lot easier. Buying a mobile home is even easier than that. Lori and I spent our first years of married life in a mobile home, and I think there's going to be a picture of this that comes up. And you want to know why? I'll tell you why, okay? We didn't have money. We could buy it for $5,000, which we borrowed from our grandfather, and we could live in it for $60 a month, and then at the end we sold it for $5,300. We actually made a profit on it, so that's why we did it. Now, I'm guessing that most of you have never even been in a mobile home, let alone lived in one. I know you're thinking, okay, Ken, trailer park boys, that seems to fit. Stats are a little frightening on the trailer parks and trailers. The primary building material in a mobile home is, anybody know? It's particle board, okay? Which doesn't, stand for a whole lot. I can remember there were nights when we were in our trailer home and stuff like this when, the wind would be, coming after us and feel like a dog. We were in a dog shaking a rat. That thing shook so much. And fires. You don't want to hear the stats. A mobile home will burn to the ground in 10 minutes. So let's say you're in the process of, building a home, and by the time you're done, it's going to probably cost you, at least $500,000. So they're digging the foundation, and it's all muddy, and you're not seeing much progress. And they're putting in cement, they're putting in rebar and stuff. And all you have to show for your mortgage and your investment payments is this big muddy hole with some cement blocks and some pipes sticking up out of the ground. Meanwhile, person next door, they pour a cement pad and they move their mobile home onto the pad, okay? And so like they're already moving in and they've got, little cement, steps out front and stuff like this and flower beds and they've sodded the lawn and they're out in a barbecue, cooking steaks, and you're got this muddy hole and you're living in your parents' basement, and you're going to be there for the foreseeable future. And it takes a lot of time and mess and difficulty to build a life that's bolted to a rock. Jesus knew that. And you'll be tempted, pretty much like everyone else, to just get impatient with the process and to start taking shortcuts and get what you want in place of what God wants for you. But there will be a day, if you build a foundation for your life, when you will say, I'm glad I did. Lori used to call our mobile home a tornado magnet. Long after our mobile home days, when we were actually living in a house that was made out of cement blocks, a tornado touched down just 15 miles from us and roared the whole way across Pennsylvania. And we went up to look at this place because it was only 15 miles away. And honestly, it looked like somebody had taken a giant lawnmower to the hardwood trees in its path and just mowed like a path that was about a mile wide up through the forest. That same tornado that day plowed right through the mobile home of a friend of ours. And her little girl was spared, and her body was found a half a mile away from the trailer where she lived. We had another close friend who lived in a trailer park down on the campus of Toccoa Falls College in Georgia. And one night a really bad storm came, and the dam right above the college broke. And it's called Toccoa Falls because they had a falls there, 186-foot drop. And that water came over of the dam from a 55-acre dam, came over that, created a 30-foot wave that went through a trailer park in which she lived right at the bottom of that. 41 people were killed along with Eloise, our friend. See, mobile homes are good for like temporary housing. They have wheels on them. By definition, that's temporary. No, but did I say they're cheap? They are cheap. But there's no foundation. And I'll tell you, you don't want to be in one of these things when the storm hits. That's what Jesus is trying to say. Because the storm comes. Everyone builds a house. Everyone builds a life, a future, a place that they want to rest at and go home at night and raise a family and make memories and store and protect what is precious to them. Everybody builds a house. Everybody chooses a foundation. Houses are expensive. They take time to build. Foundations make them more expensive. When you build a house, you want to be proud of it. You want to be safe. You want to have it filled with hope, and peace. You want to have children. You want grandchildren to come home to there. You want lives to be protected. from harm and from nasty intruders. And when you build a life, you don't want it to just get it washed off this planet when the storm comes. You want to build something that's permanent. And you want what you're building on this life to lead right into the next life, the eternal one, as opposed to being washed away. And the final part of this truth, everybody builds a house. They all look the same. Everybody wants them to last. But the storm hits everyone. Storm hits everyone. Hits both houses. We like to think, and some people teach, that God gives you, if you're a person of faith, kind of a storm-proof bubble, and you can live in this bubble and you never have to go through difficulty. And respectfully, that's just not true. Bible in general, and Jesus in particular, says very differently. There's not a single Bible, you read the Bible, there's not a single Bible hero who escaped trouble and who escaped all the pain of life. In fact, Jesus said to his disciples and to us that we would be included in that, here on this earth you will have trouble, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I've overcome the world. Most of you have been through life storms, and I'm telling you, they hit without warning. You're just kind of cruising along doing life, and all of a sudden your cell phone goes off. And it's a call that you've dreaded. Or there's a knock at your door at night and the policeman comes to the door and has news that you don't want to hear. The principal calls. You find a note on the kitchen table. The doctor comes in to the waiting room with a grim face and a clipboard, and you feel numb. And all of a sudden, everything that you've been centering your life around, the big deal at work, your new car, the money that you've accumulated and were thrilled with, all of a sudden it feels insignificant and hollow, and your world is different. Your world is changed because the storm came. See, the storm reveals what's been going on. The storm reveals, where we've used particle board instead of reinforced cement. The storm reveals the fact that we took a cheap and easy way out of our relational troubles and out of the moral dilemmas that we find ourselves in. And instead of taking the time to think about our lives, instead of taking the time to ask God for help and make the changes that we needed to make, we played Houdini, we chose to escape. We chose to, get rid of one partner and get another one, or get another line of credit, or take another drink. But you can't escape it. And sometimes we get to the end of life and think, hey, I think I did okay. Had a few skirmishes along the way, some difficulties, but me and my family survived. We still have most of our stuff intact, and I'm pretty tough. I'm a survivor. I was on the show alone. Maybe Jesus is wrong about the whole foundation rock thing. But Jesus wasn't talking about just making it through the difficult storms of life. See, there's a final storm that comes that takes everything away. It's called death. And death changes the scorecard. And suddenly, it changes everything that you've done with your life. It's not about what everybody thought about you. It's not about whether or not you ever loved God or anybody else more than yourself. It's about whether or not you did love God more than anybody else. Everybody builds a house. Everybody's house looks pretty much the same from the outside. But the storm reveals what's going on. Jesus talked about building your life. The word he used is talking about the substrata. It's talking about huge, massive rock that you build your life on and bolt it to. And that's how he describes his power. That's how he describes his teaching. We live in a world that doesn't believe much in truth like that. The truth is solid enough to build your whole life on. There's the whole thought out there that there's no absolute truth. I'm telling you there is. And Jesus believed in it. And he says you've got to build your life on that truth. And you may decide, hey, there are other prophets out there and they speak into life too. So if you're going to follow another prophet, let me ask this. Did they claim to be God and judge of all the earth? And is there any evidence from their life to prove that that's who they are? Did they rise from the dead? Is what they said true? Did they change the world? Did they change the dating system? Did they fulfill the promises that they made? You need to be real specific about this, because the kind of truth that you listen to, it had better be true. We live in a time in history right now, and we've been going through this pretty much ever since we started into this series, when the entire planet has been impacted by COVID-19, and we've now been in it for 4 months? Now, God didn't cause this. God didn't cause this. I know that. He doesn't do things like that. But I wonder if he allowed it because we need a wake-up call on what's true and what isn't. See, I've said this before, when a virus comes along that's invisible to the naked eye and it drastically affects everything that we put our confidence in, the marketplace, our jobs, housing industry, sports, entertainment, travel, restaurants, every single part of the world, and shuts the whole thing down for 4 months, you need to ask, what is going to stand in the face of the ultimate storm? Life is vulnerable. God is way bigger than life. And here's what I know. What Jesus said is true and wise. Jesus talked about what brings us life and brings meaning and happiness. And it's not true because it works. It does work. It works because it's true. Because what he said is absolutely true. There's something else here, and that is that, the gate into this life is a narrow gate because it's Jesus. And it's the whole narrow, difficult road is not popular. People don't look at it and say, man, I want to be on that road. I think I can, max out my car on it. It's challenging. It sometimes, involves doing what you really need to do as opposed to what you feel like doing. And here's the truth. You're not alone. God's Spirit, the most powerful force in the universe, most powerful force on this planet, will stand behind you and give you strength. But now it's up to you. You will make a decision about what you're going to bolt your life to, what you're going to have underneath everything that you want to preserve, and it will either lead to relief, I'm glad I did, or regret, I wish I had. Choose wisely. God, I thank you so much that you sent your Son Jesus. And he came and he taught us not what would be popular, not the easy downstream way where we all just kind of float along, with our drinks with a straw in them and everything's just fine and cool and we just float down to the end. Calls us to something bigger, something challenging, something that demands the best of us and also demands your power behind us. Help us to live the truth that Jesus talked about, so that what we build lasts. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I'll come back in a moment for the benediction.
Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace.
his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, your family and your children and their children and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, your family and your children and their children and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 yes. Amen, 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 amen. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 yes. Amen, 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 amen.
So may what you're building, what you want to preserve, what you want to have when life is over, may it grow strong. May God give you wisdom in how you put it together. May God give you what you need to make it happen and the strength that you need to do what you are called to do and live the life that you're called to live. And may you build a life that lasts and look back on it and say, I'm glad I did. Amen.